Uhuru, I should say Uhuru Sasa, which means freedom now in Key Swahili. And we just completed the Jazz Zone with our brother and comrade T in Providence, and we are joined on the line by Dr. Gerald Horne, who holds the John J. and Rebecca Moore's Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, and he has a new book out with the Tion Paris. Tion Paris and Gerald Horne's book is called the African Americans and the New History of the USA, and we are looking forward to talking to our comrade, Gerald Horne. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, it's all good.
And let me let Melinda kick everything off.
Yeah, so we have a long list. So let's start with DeepSec and the PRC.
So what happened about 10 or so days ago is that a Chinese firm by the name of DeepSeek has upended the artificial intelligence industry. Recall that giants like Meta Facebook, like Alphabet Google, like Microsoft, like OpenAI, which is tied to Microsoft, have spent billions with regard to artificial intelligence. In fact, just before the DeepSeek announcement, you had a meeting at the White House where Mr. Trump was joined by Sam Altman of OpenAI and Maya Sohn of SoftBank, a Japanese venture capitalist firm, and Larry Ellison of Oracle, and pledging to spend $500 billion on this new artificial intelligence initiative entitled Stargate. Yet DeepSeek apparently has spent only $6 million, and it is open source, which means it's not proprietary. That means that anyone, anywhere, can look at the secret sauce, can look at the code, and build upon what DeepSeek has constructed. This led to a sharp drop in the US stock market, but it also helps to bespeak the point that it's going to be very difficult to isolate China technologically, which is a primary imperative of US imperialism. Just a day or two ago, I was at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, looking at memoranda from his 1980s tenure in the White House involving technology transfers across the Pacific from the United States to China. But just a day or two ago, the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman announced that if Ford Motor Company, which has been in existence for more than a century, is to survive, they will have to rely heavily upon battery technology from China. In other words, the technology transfer is now going in the opposite direction. This is taking place once again against the backdrop of Mr. Trump waging tariff wars. The most recent one, of course, he had to engage in an embarrassing climb down. That is to say, he negotiated a 11th hour agreement with both Canada and Mexico to delay tariffs against these two neighbors. Apparently, those with regard to China are going forward. I don't think that Mr. Trump has thought through the consequences of these tariff wars, but the larger point is that there is a kind of helter-skelter ethos in the White House. And I think it bespeaks the weakness of US imperialism precisely in the face of the rise of the People's Republic of China and the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the other nations that have recently associated themselves with this partnership. And in terms of not thinking through the consequences of his actions, which helps to underscore the erratic nature of policy making and the overall weakening of US imperialism, this is a point that you folks may want to comment on. As a person who has been monitoring Canadian media of late, I've been struck by the anti-Yankee sentiments coming out of Canada, including booing the US national anthem at a Toronto Raptors basketball game. I've heard elite Canadians suggest that the relationship will never be the same again. And if we had a more sagacious, wiser leadership on this side of the border, particularly in the Black movement, they would be beating a path north of the border, just like enslaved Africans did in the 19th century, to try to break bread with Canadians of various stripes in order to put pressure on US imperialism. But sadly, I don't necessarily see that taking place, which obviously is not a positive development. But in any case, you may want to comment upon the proliferation of anti-Yankee sentiment in Canada and what it portends.
You want me to go first, or you want to go first, Melinda? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you could go first. You could go first.
Well, I think that I listen to can't move around a lot. In this particular climate, in terms of the weather, it's been pretty vicious out here. But I listen to listen to left, right, center radio, and I monitor the situation. And it looks like there is a small sort of a anti-Yankee sentiment, but I think it is due to it has a lot to do with Mr. Trump. People are saying a lot of the talk shows are saying that as generally we are friends with Canada, especially. I listen to know a lot of people from Windsor. I lived in Windsor. Melinda lived in Windsor as well. And you have thousands of people who go to work, who live in Windsor and still work in Detroit. I think it might be 32,000 or 42,000 or something like that. And it's America and Canada are kind of tied to the hip. I also pay attention to the FBA, the Tariq Nasheed's group, and they are pumping an anti-Canada line, they're pumping the USA fundamental Black American line, and they're basically saying that it's not really they're not really promoting an African situation. They are promoting that we are indigenous. We were here before the Africans. We were here before even the native. We are the Aboriginal people in North America, and I think that is there was a Black presence in in North America or in the Americas, but majority of our folks came from during the transnational so-called slave trade. wasn't so-called, but the transfer of Africans, people around the world. That's my take on it.
Well, I don't get it. So so they're saying because we're an Aboriginal people, that means we're anti-Canada? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
they're
don't get it.
anti-anybody. I mean, they're basically taking a Katanga province, like a Shombe position. I mean, well, they would say that they're not anti. They're not not necessarily anti anybody, but the FBAs. We are the flavor of the month. We are, we are the smartest, the fastest runners. We are the flavor of the month. Basically that's the line that they're taking, and everybody should bow down to us.
So they're not really commenting on the conflict between Canada and the United States, in other words.
Yeah. No, I don't think they are.
Okay.
No, Canada. Canada. Go ahead, Melinda.
Yeah. I have like a little thing. It's interesting. I mean, there's always been sort of like a kind of a sentiment in Canada or general that goes across political lines that, Canadians have, sort of this thing that we're not American. So that's the underlying thing. But at the same time, we see ourselves as a partner. I mean, well, especially, sort of the elite or ruling classes of Canada, we see ourselves as that we're kind of, a partner with the United States. We're kind of like a Robin to the Batman, you know what I'm saying? In that sense. So if people recall, if we remember, we go back to like, Crenshaw days where, he made like a snide comment about American politics at a UN, and he was on the mic, and it was a big thing, right? Like it said, like, something anti-American or whatever, and that was a big thing. So that's sort of the underlying thing, and I see that. Now politically, like especially when it comes to energy, where the fact is that Ontario supplies 1.3 million houses of electricity. And I've been seeing on
in the
social
United
media,
States.
Yeah, in the United States, like from Michigan to New York and Wisconsin. That's mainly what Ontario supplies. And for audiences who don't know Canadian politics, like we have a federal government, but then we also have a provincial government, which are pretty much their own entities. So like Ontario definitely is pretty integrated into the, New York, supplying electricity to New York, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I saw earlier, like even Michiganers saying we should actually cut off, like turn the switch and like shut it down. So, but at the same time, I don't think Rob Ford had a big so harsh words towards Trump, but at the same time, I don't see him actually cutting the cord, you know what I mean? Or cutting the switch, or, basically, kind of withholding energy against the tariffs. So we'll see what happens, but that's my take. I think the general population of Canada, there has always been sort of this, we're not Americans, so we're different. No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, so like you said, Gerald, last week that Rob Ford, his brother, Doug Ford is more. Rob Ford was former mayor, but Doug Ford, his brother, he's more concerned about pulling the plug on China.
Yeah, no, that's what he said. He didn't even even talk about pulling the that's not even in the framework. I mean, that would have been a move. Okay, we don't give you anything. Okay, we're gonna cut it. But I don't see that happening because our economies are so integrated. Like the people who are, if we cut the cord, the people who are making money here, they're going to lose money. So I don't see that happening. But I mean, it would be a move to actually challenge the tariff situation. But I don't see that happening. On the other side, I think it is kind of, affecting the conservative federal campaign in the way that, Poilievre is pretty aligned with Trump, and he has this line where, like, if I'm in power, I can negotiate. The liberals can't. So, give me the reins, and everything will be okay once I get in power. But, like, that's a conservative line right now. So that's my take.
And you're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. And when we talk about the Zuma's daughter, she's being charged with inciting riots in 2021. And I think is she also an MP in South Africa?
That is correct. Of course, Jacob Zuma is a former leader of the African National Congress, a present leader of the so-called MK Party, which upset the apple cart of the African National Congress in the most recent national elections by garnering about 15% of the vote, driving the ANC below the 50% level down to 42%. And this is taking place against a very serious backdrop. I know that there are many who are critical of the post-1994 trajectory of the ANC, but Mr. Trump, once again, has frozen aid to South Africa, aid significantly going to patients afflicted with HIV/AIDS, by the way. And he has also opened the door to Afrikaner, for agriculturalists, Afrikaners being the settlers, mostly of Dutch and French Protestant origin, who helped to implant apartheid in 1948. There was a law recently passed in South Africa that authorizes the government to engage in land reform, not unlike the land reform across the border in Zimbabwe. Called that when land reform was effectuated in Zimbabwe, it caused sanctions to be imposed against that neighbor of South Africa, helping to drive the economy into the ditch. Washington, under Mr. Trump, is basically promising a similar policy towards South Africa. And he has also opened the door to these Afrikaners settling in the United States of America, believe it or not. Despite his alleged anti-immigrant ethos, but obviously that ethos does not extend to fellow settlers. This is an exemplar of settler solidarity. And you saw settler solidarity also when Mr. Netanyahu materialized at the White House a few days ago, and Mr. Trump, reading from a script, believe it or not, offered to not only take over Gaza, but engage in ethnic cleansing and construct a so-called Riviera on the Mediterranean, speaking of Gaza. This has stoked outrage in the Arab world. There will be a special meeting of the Arab League later this month to respond. And I must say, even though there are those who said we should not rub their noses, speaking of the Arab Americans who voted for Mr. Trump, that we should not remind them of their vote. But it's difficult not to, because they basically got bamboozled by voting for Mr. Trump. Now, to be fair, in cities like Dearborn, which has a heavy Arab American population, about 18% voted for Jill Stein, the Green candidate, which is a figure larger by several orders of magnitude than other comparable cities and regions. But having said that, this pressure on South Africa is very serious. It also takes place in the context of South Africa sending troops to the Eastern Congo, where a number have died at the hands of rebels, so-called M23, sponsored by Rwanda, that led to a verbal spat between President Kagame of Rwanda and President Ramaphosa of South Africa. Rwanda also, at the invitation of the Mozambican government, Mozambique being an important neighbor of South Africa, intervened militarily to beat back a religious zealot campaign, and also, by the way, protect a major investment of French energy interests. Recall as well that Mr. Biden's last foreign trip was to Angola, which we said at the time was part of this effort to encircle South Africa. So South Africa is under pressure right now, and it's difficult right now to imagine some sort of coup taking place or some sort of forcible overthrow of the ANC government. But I'm sure that on the drawing board at the intelligence agencies in Washington and at the Pentagon, that some plans have been concocted. And once again, this is evidentiary of the weakness of US imperialism in the face of the China challenge, not only pressuring Canada, pressuring Mexico, pressuring Panama, pressuring Denmark, now pressuring South Africa. This is a portrait of US imperialism in decline. And as many of us have envisioned, it may be at its most dangerous moment precisely when it is in decline, because it feels that it has little left to lose. And like a latter-day biblical figure, it may decide to bring down the entire temple on its head.
You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. You want next question, Melinda? You're listening to Diasporic Music. I hope Melinda's still there. She hasn't dropped.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here. So let's go on to. Sorry, I'm multitasking. Of course, as I'm always multitasking. So let's go to the Grenada, and PM spends a week in PRC.
Well, this was quite extraordinary. The Prime Minister of Grenada spent a week in China and had multiple audiences with the leadership, including with President Xi Jinping. It's difficult to imagine a Prime Minister of Grenada getting such an audience with a US president in Washington, D.C. Perhaps if the Prime Minister is lucky, he could get an audience with an Assistant Secretary of State, for example. And this is evidentiary, once again, of the strength of China and the BRICS. We've reported previously about Cuba joining the BRICS and how the Port of Mariel is now being envisioned as sort of a pan-Caribbean hub that will encompass eventually Jamaica, Haiti, perhaps even further south into Grenada itself. And this is the state of play right now. And I think that there are many in the United States who really don't really keep up with what's going on in the world. They have a pocket full of basic principles, or so they say, and they don't necessarily test those basic principles against day-to-day events. And so this question of China and the BRICS is not something that they necessarily thought about that deeply. And if they have, they tend to dismiss the BRICS as from an ultra leftist point of view, which obviously helps to dovetail with the interests of U.S. imperialism, surprise, surprise. But in any case, we should not replicate that fundamental basic error.
Dr. Horne, we have not discussed the new book, African Americans and the New History of the USA. That is a book that you put together with Tian Paris. And first of all, who is Tian Paris, and could you talk about the book?
So she's a graduate student in Great Britain, and we worked on the previous book, I Dare Say, The Reader, under my name. And what she basically does with regard to these two books is gain permissions from various publishers for us to use what I've written for various publishers in this new volume. This new volume, African Americans and a New History of the United States of America, traces our history from half a millennium ago up until the present. And it has a number of fundamental principles. One is that settler colonialism, the system that descended upon North America, particularly south of the Canadian border, was a system based upon class collaboration between and amongst European settlers of various class backgrounds, all sponsored by the 1%, and that class collaboration is the key to understanding how Donald J. Trump got 77 million votes in November 2024, and how, as he's executing what is fundamentally a counter-revolution as we speak, upending the federal bureaucracy, throwing workers into the unemployment line, into the ranks of the homeless, and the 77 million strong, even some who might wind up in the unemployment line, or not necessarily raising their voices in protest. At the same time, class struggle has been the mantra of the descendants of enslaved Africans, and of course the enslaved Africans themselves engaged in class struggle, given the objective, horrific conditions that we face, including trying to overthrow governments, including aligning with Native American groupings, aligning with foreign invaders, such as in 1812, when the United States tried to seize Canada once again, and the Africans in Washington, D.C. joined the Redcoats in burning down that capital city. So class struggle versus class collaboration is a principle that I trace through the centuries. Another principle that I trace is this dialectic, this triptych between and amongst religion, race, and class. That is to say, half a millennium ago, a major marker of society was religion. In North America, that took the form of Protestants versus Catholics. They were Christians who were at each other's throats, burning each other at the stake in the mother country, speaking of what is now Great Britain. But a few centuries later, they had joined hands under the new identity politics that was whiteness, and were burning Africans at the stake in terms of these ritualistic lynchings that pockmarked the landscape, particularly in the South, but not exclusively in the South. That question of religion morphing into race then was upset by the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, which involved a revolt of the unpaid sector of the working class. Unfortunately and sadly, many who consider themselves devotees of class analysis have not put the Haitian Revolution in that context. But the Haitian Revolution inaugurated a new era of class politics, which reached a zenith with the Russian Revolution of 1917, inaugurating the first socialist country, which then extended the hand of solidarity to to colonized Africans in the continent and also in the Caribbean, which led to their independence, which in turn put pressure on U.S. imperialism. If they were to compete with the socialist camp for hearts and minds, they had to ease the horrific pressure of U.S. apartheid or Jim Crow, which eventuates in the Compromise of 1954, whereby internationalists led by Paul Robeson were tossed overboard in return for anti-Jim Crow concessions. But alas, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, that bargain, that compromise of 1954 became null and void, which is where we are today. Because my own assessment is that the counter-revolution that's now unfolding in the United States of America is not necessarily understood properly. Certainly, there has been pushback against the counter-revolution, particularly against immigrants being deported, most recently to Guantanamo, illegally occupied Cuban territory. But also those deportations are expected to accelerate this week. Expect enormous numbers of Venezuelans to be sent back to Venezuela as a result of a bargain struck with President Maduro and Mr. Trump's representative, Richard Grenell, just a few days ago, which is ironic since many Venezuelans, such as not unlike some of the Arab Americans who voted for Mr. Trump, they considered themselves to be pro-Trump, but now they're about to be sent back to Caracas. So in any event, that's a pithy summary of this new book, African Americans and the New History of the United States of America.
We're just about out of time, but I wanted you to basically, I guess, go into the Pan-African Film Festival next week. But the last thing I wanted you to we're raising funds, and I would just like for you to close by telling us why people should support Diasporic music on Black Power 96.
Well, as you know, Diasporic music is an oasis in a parched desert of media. It provides music and music analysis and global analysis and political analysis. There's nothing like it in the media ecosphere, and it deserves and merits the generous support of any within range of our voices.
And with that, I would like to thank you, sir. We will be back next week with you next week, and we are looking forward to hearing your analysis of the Pan-African Film Festival, which is taking place in the City of the Angels as we speak.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. And Melinda Francis, we'd like you to, any final thoughts?
Well, I'm going to encourage listeners to please, any amount counts, become a sustainer, support this show, support the station, and go to blackpower96.org/donate, and any amount counts, and keep donating. Yeah, and tell your friends to donate as well.
We state these facts only to let you know that those of us who are revolutionary, Pan-Africanists, is not because we love revolution. It is historically determined, and we have no alternative but to follow history and to use history for the benefit of our people.